Welcome to this presentation on the astrological events that are happening that are quite significant at this kind of crucial time in human history. I wanted to let everybody know about this. I'm Willa Kaiser. I'm an astrologer and homeopath, and just like everyone, I've been really fascinated with what's going on, and I think we're all pretty much caught up in all of the events of the time. So I wanted to offer some perspective from the Vedic astrology tradition. So let me start this slideshow. Hopefully you can see and hear me well. So I'm going to go through a series of astrological events that are going on and explain their significance. And I'm also going to look at some very crucial astrology charts of the current president of the United States, the president-elect of the United States, and his vice president, and actually the chart of the US itself to get a little bit of perspective on what's going on there. And also look at these different transits and how they're likely to affect the situation. So first thing that we look at is that Saturn, which is a planet of responsibility, limitation, work, focus, pressures, obstacles, went into its own sign of Capricorn in January of this year, and will be there more or less through January of 2023. And so this is a time where we all, depending on where Saturn and Capricorn are in our charts specifically, are kind of forcing us to take extra responsibility, to feel extra pressures, to have to get into good routines, whether it's with our health or our work, and basically step up our discipline about things and be organized. Those are some of the better traits of Saturn. Some of the more negative ones have to do with obstacles, sickness and disease, and getting, limits put on us. So we can expect these kinds of influences on both a personal and a global level. And actually, I've done another webinar specifically about how this Saturn and Capricorn transit may affect you on a personal level. But right now, we're kind of looking at the bigger picture. So this is the chart of the United States. And what we I'll just point out a few traits here. The sign that is rising in the chart, the ascendant for the United States, this is a chart that was rectified by James Kelleher and is used by many Vedic astrologers. The sign that was rising is Sagittarius, and Sagittarius is a sign of justice and righteousness and truth. And of course, the United States was really a trailblazer in democracy from its beginning. In fact, this chart is based on Independence Day, July 4th, 1776. That's what this is a chart of. And so the other thing we can see here is that at the moment, Jupiter is in the ascendant of the United States chart, which is a very fortunate thing because Jupiter in his own sign brings justice and righteousness and truth. And unfortunately, that is going to change in just a few days, actually. But Jupiter has been in its sign of Sagittarius off and on for about a year, but it's gone back and forth between Capricorn, where it's debilitated. So that's one of the big effects that's going on. Here's the ascendant that I was talking about before. Now, the other thing that's going on in the chart of the United States is that as of October of 2015, just kind of in time for the 2016 campaigns and elections, the United States went into a major period of Rahu. And Rahu is like the head of a hungry dragon. I'm going to tell the story of Rahu a little bit later, but it represents sudden changes and deceptions, things not being the way they seem. In the chart of the United States, it's in the 8th house, which is a house of big shifts and changes and transformations, sometimes uncomfortable. And so this was the period where our current president won election, was during this period. So it made a lot of sense in a lot of ways that there would be something very revolutionary happening, something really revolutionary and disruptive was bound to occur. Which direction, we didn't know, obviously, but in this case, the status quo was overthrown, and Rahu, and you'll see in the chart of our current president, Rahu also has a very, very prominent role. So a good thing to keep in mind. So those are some of the factors that are occurring. And if you just look, interestingly enough, when Barack Obama was elected president, we had just gone into a major period of Mars, and he was basically president all through this Mars period. And Mars in the US chart is in the sign of Gemini, which represents, communications and making connections. It's with the ruler of the ascendant Jupiter, which is a planet of truth and justice and things like that. So just a few words. I'm not going to get into a whole thing about the US chart, but just to understand that we've been in this Rahu period now since October 2015. And then we were in a period of Rahu Jupiter starting in 2018. But just on the day that the election results were announced, November 7th, if you look over here, we went into a period of Rahu Saturn. Now, I was just talking about Saturn a little earlier, so we can expect that things are going to be a bit Saturnian in the United States. Now, Saturn in the US chart is in the 10th house. And so the 10th house is a house of the government and rulership and organizations. So Saturn in the 10th can give more discipline, can give more limitations. It also may very much be connected with restrictions having to do with disease. And one of the reasons for that is that the moon is in a sign of Saturn. It's in the sign of Aquarius, and it's in a lunar mansion called Shatabisha, which is connected with disease and healing. And so there is a sense that during this time, we may be dealing with diseases, and we may have to really focus, be disciplined, and find ourselves under some restrictions during this time because of disease. So there may be a shift in how things are handled. In Jupiter time, it was more expansive and people doing what they want, etc. But in this Saturn time, there may be a little bit more of a clamp down, more of a focus. Like I said, you can decide whether you think that's a good or bad thing, but it may be a necessary thing. And that's Saturn is kind of like that in terms of making things be very, having to be right and doing them properly and doing them with focus and with discipline. And yes, as I said, just amazing coincidence, not really coincidence, but astrologically, that this Jupiter to Saturn transition happened exactly on November 7th of 2020, as you can see in this little chart over here. So this is a chart of the moment that the election results were announced. I made this chart for Washington, D.C. for 11:30 a.m., which is when all of the major networks got all the data in and were able to call the election. And as you can see, at that time, Sagittarius was rising. This is the sign, this is also the ascendant of the United States. And Jupiter right now is in the sign of Sagittarius, representing truth and justice. It's said that Jupiter in the ascendant can remove 100,000 flaws in the chart, and especially in Sagittarius, because this is the very strong, active form of Jupiter when Jupiter is in Sagittarius. So this was a very auspicious omen and sign from the stars for the election results, saying, yes, this is the correct results, everything's going to be okay. So I was very reassured at that time. Of course, I know there's a lot going on right now, but based on this chart, it looks like there is some prevalence of justice. Now, Jupiter is only in Sagittarius, as I was saying earlier, for a few more days. I think it's November 19th. So when Jupiter leaves Sagittarius, times will be a little bit more challenging. But the fact that the election results were called at that time was very, very auspicious. The moon was also in a very auspicious place in its own sign of Cancer. Moon in Cancer, moon represents the people in these kinds of charts. And so moon in Cancer represents a kind of healing, a sense of safety, a sense of security. These are all traits that are associated with Cancer. And let's see, those are kind of the main things I wanted to bring up about this chart. The lunar mansion that Jupiter is in or was in on that day is Uttara Shada, that gives the Shakti or divine power of victory, of unstoppable victory. It's associated with Ganesh and overcoming obstacles and things like that. So again, quite an auspicious timing for the election results. Here's the chart of Joe Biden. And I've looked at the work of many Vedic astrologers. Pretty much everyone, with some exceptions, felt that Joe Biden would win this election based on his chart, and also based on the chart of Kamala Harris, and also based on what Trump's chart is looking like for the time right now. But in any case, in this chart, it was also very auspicious that when the election results were announced, because the moon was conjoined his natal Jupiter, and Jupiter in his chart is exalted in the sign of Cancer, which is its place of exaltation. And in his chart, it's in the 9th house, which is the house of leadership and Dharma. It's also the Lord of the 5th house, which is the house of being a ruler. And it's placed in the 9th house, which is the house of righteousness and truth. So it kind of gives him an ability to be a ruler with a sense of truth and righteousness. And the fact that the moon was transiting his Jupiter right at the time that the election results were announced was extremely auspicious. So in terms of planetary periods, Biden, starting in 2006, has been in a major period of Jupiter. And of course, during that whole period, he was vice president for some of that, from I guess 2008 to 2016. So it has brought those results for him. And now he's in a still major period of Jupiter, but in a minor period or a sub-period of Rahu. And I was mentioning that Rahu is this head of a hungry serpent. Rahu, of course, is very important right now because the US is in is in a period, a major period of Rahu. And in Joe Biden's chart, Rahu is in the 10th house, the house of what you're doing out in the world. So it shows, you know, an important time for him to be doing something out in the world. It's also in a lunar mansion called Magha, which is represented by a throne room. So it has to do with being a leader. And we're going to see this when we get, again, when we get to Trump's chart, we're going to see that Trump also has actually his ascendant in this same place. So we see this quite a bit in the charts of leaders and rulers because it's represented by a throne. So he's in a sub-period of Rahu, and he's in a major period of Jupiter. And because these are the two planets that rule the most auspicious houses of the chart, the 9th and the 10th, it forms what's called a Raj Yoga or a king-making yoga. So long story short, looks really auspicious, you know, and we've been looking at this for a long time as we've been pondering the election and looking and saying, looks like Joe Biden could win this election because he seems all set up to be taking on a major leadership role at this time. Interestingly, Kamala Harris's chart is even more powerful and positive. In her chart, we see Rahu right in the ascendant, exalted in its sign of Gemini, which makes her an excellent communicator, coordinator, those Gemini qualities of, you know, taking one thing, putting it together with another thing. Now, she is also very much in a Rahu kind of period. She's in a major period of Rahu, just like the United States is. And she's in a sub-period of Mercury as of June 28th, 2020, you know, around the time when she was actually chosen to be vice president, a little bit after that, I think. But anyway, Mercury in her chart is the Lord of the Ascendant, so it represents her, and it's placed in the 5th house, which is the house of leadership and power. It's with the sun, which is the planet that represents leadership and power as well. And it's in a mutual exchange. The sun is actually a bit, it's actually in a sign of debilitation, which isn't a good thing, but that debilitation is canceled due to an exchange with Venus. So these two houses, the 3rd house of communication and the 5th house of power and authority, are in exchange with each other. So yeah, this is a very powerful chart that again kind of says very clearly this is somebody who could come into a strong place of power during this time. So I've been mentioning how Jupiter has been in this sign of Sagittarius, its own sign of truth and justice. And it is leaving Sagittarius and moving into the next sign, Capricorn, which is Jupiter's sign of debilitation. And this is one of the very difficult transits that are happening right now that we're going to go into in more detail. So Jupiter is very expansive, peaceful, brings everybody together for a common goal. As a planet, it has the strongest magnetic field. It represents truth, justice, righteousness, harmony, and good fortune. And it has been in the ascendant of the United States, giving its blessings, but it is going into Capricorn in just a few days. That's why I wanted to hurry up and do this and let people know what's going on. So it's kind of a back and forth thing. Planets go retrograde and leave signs and then go forward. So basically it will be in Capricorn until April 5th, and then it's going to go into Aquarius for a while, which will be a better transit in terms of what's going on with COVID when it gets into Aquarius, and I'll explain why in a little while. Then it was going to go back into Capricorn on September 14th for a couple of months. So That's a lot to keep track of, I know, but for now, just know that Jupiter is leaving Capricorn on November 19th, coming up very soon, and will be there until, early April. So I'm going to explain a little bit more about Rahu, the north node of the moon, for those of you that are not familiar with it. It's actually the north and the south node. The north and the south node of the moon, mathematically speaking, are eclipse points. They are the places that if the luminaries, the sun and the moon, are in those positions, we have an eclipse. And we're going to see, as we look at Donald Trump's chart, he was actually born on the day of an eclipse. You'll see that the sun and the moon are conjoined, the north and south nodes. And so the sun and the moon represent the light. They're the luminaries. And then the north and south nodes take away the light. So the story goes that the gods and the demons, who you can see in this slide, were churning the ocean of milk, that's Vishnu on top there, using a serpent. And as they were trying to get the drop of Amrita, or immortal nectar, to come out, and just when the drop came out, a serpent came down and got the drop in his mouth and became immortal. And then Vishnu took his chakra, which is his weapon, and chopped the serpent in half, and it became a body without a head and a head without a body. And so the head without without a body is Rahu, and it represents that bottomless pit feeling that we have, hungry for something but never getting enough, and often brings deception, deceit, shock, disappointment, things not being the way they seem. And Ketu is the tail, the south node, and it represents renunciation and letting go. So those are the main indications that we're going to talk about right now. So here's just a little more information. These are the actual symbols. Rahu is represented by this head-looking thing. Ketu is represented by this U-looking thing. And then this, you can kind of see the serpent eating the sun, which is what happens, of course, during an eclipse. So Rahu isn't all bad. Rahu is very similar to Saturn, and Ketu is very similar to Mars. So some of the good qualities of Rahu include research, creativity, unconventional and innovative ideas, things like that. So, we don't know planet gives only good results or only bad results. But Rahu does have this special role of really representing just our cravings that keep getting us into trouble lifetime after lifetime, what we think we always need, and then being disappointed because we never really are able to get what we want ultimately. So here's the chart of Donald Trump. It's like an amazing chart to study, simply amazing chart to study. So I'll go into it in a little bit of detail and explain to you what I think is going to happen now. So the chart he's got Leo rising. We're not surprised. So Leo is the sign, the royal sign, the sign of royalty, and some might consider it a sign that could be even a bit self-centered at times. And the lunar mansion that the ascendant is in, along with Mars, which of course Mars is a planet that kind of represents fiery energy and aggression and things, is Magha, which is the throne room. Now remember, I was talking earlier about how Joe Biden also has a placement, but in his chart, it's in the 10th house, and it's Rahu in the 10th. For Trump, he's got it in his ascendant. So this throne room with this fiery Mars, we can definitely already kind of see a little bit of his personality in this. And then we look to see where the sun is, because the sun is the planet that rules Leo, and the sun is in the 10th house, the house of of work and what you're doing out in the world. And if you can see this, if you recognize any of these signs, here's the sun and here's Rahu right next to it within a degree or so. And here's the moon and here's Ketu. And so basically he was born on the day of a lunar eclipse, which is very interesting because we're going to be talking more about eclipses in just a minute. But in any case, he was born during an eclipse, or maybe not right at the moment, but that day there was an eclipse. And so basically these luminaries are being eclipsed. Now, Trump has a highly afflicted moon, a terribly afflicted moon. It's in its sign of debilitation. It's the ruler of the 12th house. And it was, of course, as I said, it was a lunar eclipse when he was born. So he was born during a debilitated eclipsed moon. And, you know, the moon represents the feelings and the emotions and the mother. It's really kind of a sad chart, actually, because it just shows a real lack of love, ultimately, especially because it's in the 4th house, which is a house of feelings, just a lack of feelings. I think they just somehow got really smashed right from the start, never really had a chance. So when Trump was elected, he had just, or when he assumed the presidency, he was actually in Rahu Mars when he was elected. The last days of Rahu Mars was when the election was. And as I said, Rahu is in the 10th house with the sun, which is the planet of royalty, etc. Mars is in his ascendant. But then when he started actually being president, he was at the beginning of his Jupiter period. And Jupiter in his chart is in the 2nd house, which is a house of personal gain. And it is aspecting the 10th house, which is the house of the work that you're doing. It's also the ruler of the 5th house, which is the house of power and authority. So it showed that this was a time he was destined to get some power and authority, and it would be of personal benefit to him. Now, what happened was in January of 2019, he went into a sub-period of Saturn. And Saturn in his chart is the Lord of the 6th house, which is a house of enemies and troubles and trials, placed in the 12th house, which is a house of loss. It doesn't look like this was a good time for him. And most Vedic astrologers looking at this predicted that, you know, starting in January of 2019, things were not going to go so well for him. You know, and the rest is history. But anyway, he did, of course, go through a lot of trials at that point. And interestingly, go back here. Interestingly, when the election results were announced, I was talking about how the moon was in this auspicious place in Biden's chart. Well, in Trump's chart, it was in the 12th house, which is the house of loss. And it was transiting Saturn, which is the planet that rules the sub-period that he's in. And it's basically kind of saying astrologically, sorry, guy, you lost. You know, we hate to ever use the L word around Donald Trump, of course, because we don't want to upset him. But the moon, you know, the moon was in Biden's beautiful 9th house of power, transiting his exalted Jupiter. And it was transiting Donald Trump's 12th house of loss on Saturn, which also, you know, represents sort of, again, discipline, you know, getting your karma meted out to you, having to do things that you don't necessarily want to do, that kind of stuff. So from, like I said, you know, from the astrological point of view, And I'm just pointing out a few factors. Vedic astrology just has so much going on, but these are the ones that really speak to me. It seems clear, what's going to happen, or and how the election went. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Donald Trump's moon and the lunar mansion that it's in, because the upcoming eclipse on December 14th, which is also the day that you may be aware the Electoral College meets, is happening. There's a solar eclipse happening right in this lunar mansion. So it's a very interesting lunar mansion. It's called Jeshta. And it's ruled by Indra, who is the king of the gods. So it has this theme of authority and power. It's known as the eldest or the most senior. So people in Jeshta, with Jeshta lunar mansions, like to be considered to be the best, and the authority and the Shakti, or the divine power that it gives, is the power to rise, overcome, and conquer. So it's very much of a power lunar mansion, about power and authority, and being the best. It has the desire to attack and defend. So again, very warlike in a certain way. I wanted to just point out that if you see all these eyes all over Indra, the story goes, Indra was always going around seducing women, especially people's wives, and he would get in trouble for it. And one time he got in trouble for it, and there were vaginas put all over his body. And so to kind of get rid of that, so he was covered in vaginas because of having seduced women in a kind of illicit way. And so then he underwent some penance, and due to the penance that he did and the austerities, those vaginas turned into eyes. So now he has eyes all over, but it still is obviously a very sensual, sexually oriented lunar mansion. Of course, it's located in the sign of Scorpio, which we know is also associated with sexuality. And the desire is to attain supremacy among the gods. So this is being the best. I'm the best this, and I'm the best that. I mean, it's kind of nails it in terms of understanding the mind of this particular president. So yeah, sometimes it's not always like this. Sometimes people who have their moon in Jeshta can be spiritual warriors. People who are usually, there's kind of a fierceness and a use of power and things like that, but it may be, and certainly I think his supporters see him in that way, as somebody who's fighting for the light and that sort of thing. And it's represented by a circular talisman, so it has this connection with protection as well. So as I said, this is a really key lunar mansion right now, because this upcoming solar eclipse is going to be right in this lunar mansion on the exact degree of Trump's moon. So before we talk about that eclipse, there's a lunar eclipse that's happening on November 30th at about 1:42 a.m. Pacific time, in a lunar mansion called Rohini, which is a lunar mansion that is very much associated with singing and dancing and vehicles. It's more of an auspicious kind of lunar mansion. Rohini was considered to be the favorite wife of the moon god, and is very much connected with the arts. So this particular, it's also not a full lunar eclipse. It's a penumbral lunar eclipse, and is of a bit less consequence than the upcoming one. But basically, whenever you have one eclipse, you always have a series. And so this is the first of a series. So this is kind of the beginning of the eclipse season that we're heading into at this very intense time of our history. So this is the eclipse that is happening on the day that the Electoral College meets. And this is happening in the Jeshta Nakshatra, the lunar mansion associated with Indra and power, etc. So it definitely indicates significant events in terms of power. Now, the question is, what does that mean? Well, I can't find any Vedic astrologer that thinks that this could possibly be a good thing for Donald Trump to be having a solar eclipse on his natal moon that the day that the Electoral College meets. It just looks bad. Eclipses are about the lights going out. They're about sudden changes and turmoil and things like that. So I just got to say, I don't see any way around the fact that this looks like a very bad day for Trump. And especially given how afflicted his natal moon is. So that's what I see, that this is a bad day for Trump. Now, the question is, well, what does it do for Biden? It's happening in Biden's 8th house from his moon. Eclipses are judged from the moon. And the 8th house from the moon indicates, big changes. Sometimes it can be a negative thing, but given how bad it is for Trump, it's got to be a good big change for Biden, I would say. If I was just looking at Biden's chart and there wasn't this whole drama going on, I would just say this, looks like a time when a very big change or transformation could happen, and there's a slight chance, it slightly looks a little more negative than positive. But the other thing is, it's happening right on. It's happening in Biden's ascendant, not to the exact degree, but it's in his ascendant. So it does look like a big transformative time. And I can't say it's 100% like, oh yeah, it's just great for Biden and terrible for Trump. It's like really, really terrible for Trump and a little bit bad for Biden. But overall, because, you have to weigh all these factors that I've been talking about, overall, it looks like Biden is going to, is going to win. And, he's won the vote, and he's going to, the Electoral College is going to go, the way that it should. That would be my forecast based on this. So I'm switching gears now to talk about COVID, because we've all been really immersed in what's been going on with the election. But as we know, COVID cases are on the rise. And this is actually a chart of when COVID appeared. This work was done by James Kelleher, one of my teachers. And he presented this in January of 2020, before the COVID outbreak. And I looked at that and thought, oh my God, that is horrible. And I actually contacted him and said, this is terrible. And he said, yeah, it is terrible. So we could kind of see it in the chart before it actually came to pass. So I'll just explain to you what I'm seeing here and why I say it's terrible. Moon represents healing, and moon represents people. And in this chart, the moon is in the 6th house of disease, in a sign of Saturn, which is the planet of disease, and it's aspected by all of the malefic planets. It's just another hammered moon. Remember, I was talking about how bad Trump's moon was. Well, this moon is also very, very bad. It's not debilitated, but it's in a bad house and aspected by bad planets. It's also in a lunar mansion called Shatabisha, which is the same place that the US moon is in. And so strong connection and susceptibility that the United States has, because it shares the moon with the COVID virus. So basically the moon was when COVID was kind of emerging. The moon in transit was transiting the moon of the US. So strong connection and one of the reasons that we're being hit so hard. And Shatabisha is that lunar mansion that I mentioned that has to do with 1,000 physicians and alternative healing methods and having to use a lot of different approaches. So it's a very, very challenged moon. It also, the fact that all of these malefic planets are aspecting the moon is what creates a lot of, the anxiety and fear and everything like that, because the moon is the mind. And so the moon is kind of isolated in this chart in a bad house, having bad aspects. So the timing of things, the other thing is, okay, Rahu is the planet that is in the 10th house here, very strong in its sign of exaltation in Gemini. And it's aspecting the moon, it's in the 10th house. And when the virus is in a period of Rahu. And so it is in a lunar mansion called Ardra, which is represented by a teardrop and is ruled by Rudra, the god of the storms. So it has to do with bringing a lot of suffering, basically. So we're in this Rahu period all the way through August of 2022. Right now we're in Rahu moon. And so the subperiod is moon, and moon, as I mentioned, is very afflicted in this chart, just showing a lot of suffering, lives lost, people sick. It's a bad thing happening. However, in April, Jupiter in transit will join this moon, will at least come into the sign. So there may be some relief from that point of view. Another astrologer that has another technique that he uses also is forecasting that there could be some relief in April. But the time when we actually change to a better period for this virus is actually not until August of 2022, which is quite a ways away. But what I'm hoping is that, by April of 2021, with this transit of Jupiter helping the moon here, that there will be, some relief. But everybody seems to feel that this winter is going to be pretty bad, from a public health point of view, but from an astrological point of view as well. It doesn't look like a good time from this chart and from the other charts that I'm going to show you. It's just kind of a bad time, at least bad for going out and doing stuff. Maybe good for some other things, good for spirituality. So every winter solstice, we're moving on to the winter solstice now, and what's happening then. This is kind of the culmination of all of this. The winter solstice, the sun is in a lunar mansion called Mula, which means the root. And it can be a very good time. It's ruled by Ketu, the south node, which has to do with letting go of the ego. And at this time, the sun is actually aligned with the galactic center. This is probably why it was called the root, that somehow the Vedic rishis understood that the galactic center was in this direction. So it's a good time for retreat, for connecting with our own center, with our own essence. And it involves, this is goddess who rules it is a goddess of destruction. Her name is Niriti, the goddess of destruction. So this destruction of old structures, very much like the Tower card in the Tarot. And so what this time is good for is for resting in wisdom awareness, practicing meditation. And traditionally, this is an important time for a retreat. So this year, this sun in this Mula Nakshatra lunar mansion, going to the root and the destruction of old structures and all that, coincides with a very potent conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn. So this is a little bit more about Mula. Oh, I'm echoing. Somebody must have just turned on their. Could you please turn off your sound? Whoever, just please mute yourself. Thanks. Because I was echoing. Okay. So this, as I said, this lunar mansion is ruled by Niriti, who's the goddess of destruction, points toward the galactic center, gives the power to destroy, ruin, take things apart, but it also helps us get to the root or the core of things. Sometimes I think of this lunar mansion as the crack in the universe where the demons can come out. It's kind of like being able to visit the dark side or the shadow side of things. And so it can be about getting in touch with fear and anxiety, but also working with it and dispelling it. It's connected with medicinal herbs and roots, so it's a great time also during the winter solstice to be availing yourself of medicines and foods, root vegetables, and roots like ashwagandha, medicines that are roots. So looking fear in the face, basically. And it's the place for those people who are familiar with astrology, where the arrow of Sagittarius is aimed at this tail of the scorpion, because it's right at the border of Scorpio and Sagittarius. So Swami Shivananda Murti, who was an enlightened saint in India and also a Vedic astrologer, predicted back in the 90s that Dharma would be at its lowest point during this Saturn-Jupiter conjunction. And Dharma means truth, means goodness, justice, righteousness, and that all of that would come to a low point around this conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. The reason is because Jupiter is the planet of truth and justice, and it's moving into Capricorn, and this conjunction that's happening between Jupiter and Saturn is happening in Capricorn, where Jupiter is debilitated and Saturn is strong. So Jupiter gets smashed at this time. So at this time, we're kind of reaching a low point that has been going on for a few years before this time and will continue a few years after this time. But we're getting right to that most, crucial, critical point exactly that was predicted decades ago. That December 20th. 21st, basically the winter solstice, would be the low point. So during this low point, people, instead of acting out of truth and justice, they act out of insecurity, fear, paranoia, and selfishness. So this is what's happening in our society right now. The good point is it's all temporary. So, yes, we're in a terrible time. It's kind of peaking right now, getting worse right now, but then we're going to start coming out of it. So this is the chart of that moment. And you can see here, this is actually on December 21st of 2020, just a little bit over a month from now. Jupiter and Saturn are together in Capricorn, very close to Jupiter's deepest point of debilitation, which is why it's so terrible. And also because it's at the winter solstice where, of course, in the Northern Hemisphere, the sun is at its lowest point and the darkness is the strongest. And then the sun, as I had mentioned earlier, is in a lunar mansion of Mula, which is the root. So yeah, this is a very powerful time that's coming up. There's also what's called the Kalasarpa Yoga, which is all the planets being hemmed in between Rahu and Ketu, between the north and south nodes. So that makes it an even more potent situation. And of course, the solar eclipse that happens right before that makes it even a stronger situation. So yeah, we are in a very intense astrological time, not really comparable to anything else that we might have experienced in our lifetimes. And that's why things seem a bit crazy. So here are some indications of what we can do during these times. And Vedic astrology is not just about sort of looking at what's going on with the stars, but it's also about what we can do, remedial measures. Sometimes these are gemstones or mantras or practices. My focus here is going to be on mantra and practices because I think those are the most effective. But that's really what Vedic astrology is about, is identifying what it is we can do to work with the circumstances that we're in. So eclipses in general indicate changes, endings, beginnings, highs and lows. You can feel the effects of eclipses for 1 to 3 months before and after, 3 days or up to 6 days before the eclipse, but also after the eclipse. It's really good not to undertake anything new or just stay as quiet as you can. I would say, double this because of all of the political unrest and the COVID epidemic. If you would like, traditional activity is to fast for about 3 hours before and after the eclipse. Traditionally, that would include no water, but of course, these are Hindu traditions that I'm telling you about right now. Take a bath in cold water right after the eclipse. You can take like a cold shower or something like that. The water is considered to become pure. In India, people often go into bodies of water right after the eclipse. And then make some kind of donation with love and compassion right after an eclipse. It's a way of, again, spiritual purification by making a donation. Doing meditative practices, staying home, and doing some aspiration prayers. And this is from the Buddhist tradition. We do aspiration prayers during eclipses. I didn't put it here, but another Vedic tradition is to actually write down your aspirations during the eclipse. And that sometimes they actually can come true if you kind of make a wish or make an aspiration during the eclipse. So I am going to tell you a little bit about an aspiration prayer that's specifically for an eclipse. And I can send it to you if you're interested in practicing it. So yeah, it's really a time to go within and not do outer activities, or especially, initiate new kinds of actions. So there's a beautiful prayer to Samantrabhadra, which is specifically for reciting during an eclipse. I have an incredibly wonderful translation of it. I won't have time in this presentation to go into it, but you're welcome to contact me if you're interested in having a copy of it so that you can recite it during this eclipse. So in general, this is a real perfect time to do a spiritual retreat. Not really a good time to do anything out and about. So I gave some possible dates if you want to consider really taking some time off and focusing your energy toward aspirations for the whole world or for yourself, and just help move everything in the right direction, because nothing is really carved in stone. We are creating our destiny all the time. And so this is a time when the more people who just take some time for prayer, for meditation, for setting aspirations, positive aspirations, not just for oneself, but for the whole world. However you want to do that is great. I'm going to make a few suggestions in the next few slides of things you could do. But these are some dates that would be auspicious. December 10th through 24th covers the eclipse and the solstice, and it's Dakini Day in the Buddhist tradition to Guru Rinpoche Day. So it's about half of a lunar month, starting on an auspicious day associated with the divine feminine and ending on an auspicious day associated with the divine masculine. And as I said, covers those eclipses. So that's kind of a basic time frame that would, if you were able to do a retreat during that time, you would be doing it during two of the most important points, that solar eclipse and the solstice time as well. And then if you were able to do it for longer, you could go from December 10th through January 12th, which is a full lunar month. Another possibility would be November 29th, which is right before the lunar eclipse, to December 15th, which is full moon to new moon, but it doesn't include the solstice. But I'm just kind of giving these different dates that would be auspicious astrologically in case some work better for your schedule and you might consider doing it because that particular would work for you. Or November 29th, which again is the full moon right before the lunar eclipse, to January 12th. So anyway, those are some possible dates that I would suggest. I think my top one is December 10th through 24th, if you could do something like that, or even extend the December 10th all the way to January 12th and do like a whole month. The key dates are December 14th, which is that solar eclipse, and a week later, the winter solstice, where the debilitation of Jupiter is happening. So as I mentioned, there are remedies in Vedic astrology that you can use. As I said, Vedic astrology is really about making things better, working with the circumstances we have and making them better. And for example, I've been talking about Rahu, the north node of the moon that creates eclipses and is so prominent in Trump's chart, but also actually Joe Biden's chart and Kamala Harris. They all have very prominent Rahu. And Jupiter overcomes Rahu. Rahu is kind of, can represent, deceit and things not being the way they seem. Jupiter is a planet of truth. So doing remedies for Jupiter can help with the Rahu problems. And the other is that Saturn is causing problems right now as well, in that it is going to be afflicting Jupiter when Jupiter moves into Capricorn, and the moon overcomes Saturn. So doing remedies that are associated with strengthening the moon energy and strengthening the Jupiter energy would be a very good thing to do. So the moon is associated with the mother, compassion, healing, mind and consciousness, intuition, nurturing, sentient beings, all of that. So strengthening this energy, the mother energy. And of course, there are many ways to do it. The ways that I'm going to be describing here are actually from the Buddhist tradition. First mantra up is the Tara mantra. And we invoke Tara when things are tough and we want the help of the mother. I've actually, since the pandemic started, or I might not have started right away, but because of the pandemic, we're actually meeting on Monday evenings to do Tara practice, and you'd be welcome to join us. But just chanting the Tara mantra invokes the energy of the moon, invokes the energy of being rescued from fears and troubles. So Om Tare Tu Tare Ture Soha, Om Tare Tu Tare Ture Soha, Om Tare Tu Tare Ture Soha. Om invokes auspiciousness, peace, and balance. Tare is Tara, the swift and heroic liberator who liberates us from fears, troubles, and samsara. Tutare, her powerful activity of fulfilling all wishes, brings us to nirvana. Ture, we move beyond both samsara and nirvana to the non-dual state of the Dharmakaya. And Soha establishes us in the state of complete enlightenment like a firmly like a driven stake. That's a quote from the book Tara's Enlightened Activity. So this is a very beautiful mantra, and this would be very appropriate to be chanting during this time if you are looking for a mantra. Another beautiful mantra for this time is the Mani mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum. And this is the mantra of Chenrezig, the Bodhisattva of compassion. And it is sending compassion and healing to all of the realms. In Buddhism, it's considered to be the 6 realms. And this is the 6-syllable mantra. Each syllable addresses a certain realm, but it also has an effect on the channels in our own body as well, and purifies our own channels. So the mantra is Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. So this is a slide that shows, okay, please, whoever it is, turn off your microphone. I'm echoing again. Let's see, okay. This slide shows how the different syllables of the 6-syllable mantra correspond with different wisdoms. And for example, Om is associated with the wisdom of equanimity. It overcomes or it transforms the poison of pride, and is associated with the God realm and Jupiter. So by chanting Om, we're actually able to liberate pride into equanimity. With the syllable Ma, we're able to liberate jealousy into all-accomplishing wisdom. And this is associated with the planet Mercury. Ni is associated with passion and the human realm. Pad is with Pad, we're able to liberate ignorance into basic space, the Dharma Dhatu. And this is associated with the animal realm and Saturn. May is with the syllable May, the poison of greed, we can liberate into the wisdom of discernment. And we are also addressing the hungry ghost realm and the planet Venus. And Hong, with Hong, we are liberating hatred into mirror-like wisdom. And we are addressing the beings in the hell realms and the planet Mars. So Om Mani Padme Hum. Many teachers tell us that this is all we need. This is the only mantra we need. It's a very, very special, powerful mantra, very easy to chant. If you even took time during the eclipse and during the solstice to chant this mantra, that would be fantastic. So we can sing it a few times together. Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. And one more mantra. I mentioned about Jupiter. Those two, the Mani mantra and the Tara mantra, are associated with the moon. The Vajraguru mantra is associated with Jupiter. This mantra is the mantra of Padmasambhava, the lotus-born. He was considered to be the second Buddha who was prophesied by Shakyamuni Buddha. He lived in the 8th century, that's when he came to be known anyway, from the Indian subcontinent, brought Buddhism to Tibet. He was very powerful and able to tame the spirits of Tibet who were interfering with the building of monasteries and the bringing of Buddhism to Tibet, and he was able to tame those spirits. And he hid many religious treasures known as termas in lakes, caves, fields, and forests. to be found and interpreted by future spiritual treasure finders. This is just a very short description, but these are very powerful practices and pujas, and really is a Buddha for our time. Some of those treasures are specifically for our time. So his mantra is very powerful and potent, and another good one to chant during this time, upcoming time. So I hope you can read it. It's kind of funny letters. I'll just sing it a few times and you can join me. Just keep your microphone muted because we won't really be in sync. Om Ahum Vajra Guru Padma Siddhi Hom. Om Ahum Vajra Guru Padma Siddhi Hom. Om Ahum Vajra Guru Padma Siddhi Hom. So Om represents, the enlightened body, third eye chakra. Ah represents enlightened speech, the throat chakra, seed syllable. Hom, enlightened mind, the heart chakra, seed syllable. Vajra means indestructible or thunderbolt, diamond-like. Guru is Padmasambhava, the Vajra Guru. Padma is lotus, because Padmasambhava is born from a lotus and from the lotus family. Siddhi means accomplishment, and Hom, again, enlightened mind. So that's the mantra, Om Ahum Vajra Guru Padma Siddhi Hom. So again, this mantra invokes the blessings of Guru Padmasambhava, which is the Jupiterian energies, and again, very positive mantra for this time. So before I do this final prayer here, I think I'm going to check. There are a couple of things in the chat and see. So yeah, I don't see any questions. Does anybody have a question? You can unmute yourself if you do, and then we'll move on to a final prayer. This picture, by the way, that I'm sharing here is a picture that was taken in Ashland, Oregon, or maybe Talent or Ashland, one of those places, of a whole big area that was destroyed by fire there. You can actually see the fire blazing in the background in this house. The only thing that was left standing was a Buddha. So, okay,
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
In terms of if we're doing prayogas for the, the afflicted planets, is there one that we should focus on that's key? Like, should we be trying to ameliorate the shani effect, or should we be trying to bolster the weak planets? What would be the best approach?
I would say Jupiter. I emphasizing Jupiter and the moon. Jupiter more from the point of view of righteousness and justice and dharma, and the moon more from the aspect of healing and the pandemic. But both are important. And some of it has to do with what kind of affinity people have. That's why I presented a few different mantras, is that if you feel an affinity more for one or the other. I mean, the most important thing is intention. So if you're putting your intention, I just would encourage everybody to do whatever they can during that time to put their intention toward healing, justice, the world being free of suffering, and beings waking up to their own Buddha nature. And I think the prayer, the Samantabhadra prayer, of course, Kunjazampo aspiration prayer for the eclipse time is also really good for that. So, yeah. All right. Any other questions? So I'm going to stop the share for a minute and just share quickly a little the end of a certain prayer that I like very much, that I think is appropriate.
Okay. Quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was curious if the darkest, lowest point of Dharma is December 20th. Will we be, after that date, will Dharma increase, or do you know?
Well, yes, it's all kind of a slow process, like 1 to 3 years. So it's not really saying that something terrible is going to happen on the 21st, but it's very much the winter solstice. It's like we're heading into it. That's going to be the low point, and then we are going to start coming out of it. So yeah, I think we have some chance that things are going to improve from that time, but it could be a little bit of a slow process.
Okay, thank you. And that's for not only the United States, but the world?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, these transits affect all of us, not just the United States.
Okay, from what Swami had mentioned.
Excuse
Thank you.
me? Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions? Okay, so this is a prayer called for the Buddhist people here, a prayer of devotion to make tears fall by Jigme Lingpa. We won't recite the whole prayer. It's very, very beautiful. And again, I can send you the link for where you can get this if you want to read it. But I thought we could just read the end of this prayer together as a way of concluding our time. As we reach now the end of this degenerate dark age, we have no time to practice the sacred Dharma correctly. When we are oppressed by frost, hail, flood, and drought, by sickness, epidemic, and famine, by the violence and the decadence and decay of our time, when the elements are plunged into chaos, the tendril for the planet and its inhabitants go wrong. Tendril is auspicious connection. And when beings in Tibet endure the harshest of suffering, then with all your compassion, Jetsun Guru, immediately fling open the door to a new kind of golden age. And ultimately, I pray, within the Dharmakaya's palace of clear light, may all living beings of the three worlds find relief, so that samsara is emptied from its very depths. So that's my prayer for the world. And like I said, I'm mostly wanted to do this to alleviate anxiety as much as I could. Hopefully it helped. And I just feel like the more people can just being in a state of prayer for whatever works for you personally. I made some suggestions, and I'm happy to connect with anybody who'd like support in doing retreat, because I just feel like this is a time that if we all put out our compassion, our bodhicitta, our prayers, our mantras during this time, we may be creating a better time in the future, as was just mentioned in the prayer that we just read together, so that we can go into a better age. And, I think some signs are there. In some ways, we could think of the whole COVID really stopped us all in our tracks and possibly is going to allow us to recreate a world where we're not damaging the climate and the environment in the same way. I think we're all being challenged to do that. And by being forced to stay home and contemplate and make a shift in our own consciousnesses and do what we can for the whole planet and environment and all the beings. So thank you for joining me, and may we all get through this time with some grace and some compassion and some love. Okay, take care, everybody.